Over 2 million Ethiopians have been displaced from their homes in the past year alone, a staggering number that exceeds the entire population of Namibia. And it's a crisis that's not only destabilizing the country, but also sending shockwaves throughout the entire African continent. The humanitarian fallout is being felt far beyond Ethiopia's borders, with neighboring countries like Sudan and Kenya struggling to cope with the influx of refugees. As the situation continues to deteriorate, the ripple effects are being felt in the global economy, with trade routes and supply chains being severely disrupted. The consequences are far-reaching and devastating, with real people suffering the brunt of the chaos. In Ethiopia's Tigray region, for example, over 90% of the population is in need of humanitarian assistance, with food and medicine in desperately short supply. Meanwhile, in the Somali region, clashes between ethnic groups have left hundreds dead and thousands more displaced, with the UN warning of a looming famine that could affect millions. As the crisis deepens, the African Union is under increasing pressure to intervene, with the organization's credibility hanging in the balance. At the heart of the crisis is a complex web of ethnic and political tensions that have been simmering for decades. The current conflict began in November 2020, when the Ethiopian government launched a military operation in the Tigray region, sparking a violent backlash from separatist groups. Since then, the situation has spiraled out of control, with atrocities being committed on all sides and the humanitarian situation growing increasingly dire. The Ethiopian government, led by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, has been accused of war crimes and human rights abuses, while the Tigray People's Liberation Front has been accused of carrying out attacks on civilians and ethnically motivated violence. The international community has been slow to respond to the crisis, with the UN Security Council passing a weak resolution that fails to condemn the Ethiopian government's actions. The African Union, meanwhile, has been accused of turning a blind eye to the crisis, with some member states more concerned with maintaining good relations with the Ethiopian government than with protecting the rights of the Ethiopian people. As the situation continues to deteriorate, the international community is facing growing pressure to take action, with many calling for sanctions against the Ethiopian government and greater support for humanitarian efforts. The crisis in Ethiopia has significant implications for the rest of Africa, with the potential to destabilize the entire region. The Horn of Africa is already a volatile region, with Somalia and Eritrea both struggling with their own conflicts and political instability. If the crisis in Ethiopia is not brought under control, it could have a domino effect, with the conflict spreading to neighboring countries and drawing in other regional actors. The economic implications are also significant, with Ethiopia being one of the fastest-growing economies in Africa and a key player in regional trade. The crisis is also having a significant impact on the global economy, with trade routes and supply chains being severely disrupted. The port of Djibouti, which is the main entry point for goods into Ethiopia, is being severely congested, with ships waiting for weeks to unload their cargo. This is having a knock-on effect on the entire region, with goods and supplies being delayed or diverted to other ports. The cost of the crisis is already being felt, with the Ethiopian economy estimated to have lost over $1 billion in the past year alone. As the situation continues to deteriorate, the international community is facing growing pressure to take action. The US and EU have already imposed sanctions on Ethiopian officials, and there are calls for greater support for humanitarian efforts. However, the situation is complex, and any intervention will need to be carefully calibrated to avoid making the situation worse. The Ethiopian government is unlikely to welcome external intervention, and any attempt to impose a solution from outside could be resisted by the various factions involved. The crisis in Ethiopia is a stark reminder of the fragility of African states and the need for greater support and investment in the region. The African Union and other regional organizations need to take a more proactive role in mediating conflicts and supporting humanitarian efforts. The international community also needs to take a more nuanced approach to the crisis, recognizing the complex web of ethnic and political tensions that are driving the conflict. As the situation in Ethiopia continues to unfold, one thing is clear: the consequences of inaction will be catastrophic, not just for the Ethiopian people, but for the entire African continent. The crisis has the potential to destabilize the entire region, with far-reaching implications for global trade and security. The future of Ethiopia hangs in the balance, and the world is watching to see how the situation will unfold, with the country's fate serving as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked conflict and the urgent need for collective action.